How sunlight changed human skin forever? Here's a strange fact to start with. Every human being alive today is descended from ancestors who once had dark skin. Not brown, not olive. Dark, deeply pigmented skin, similar to what you see today in parts of equatorial Africa. If that surprises you, it should, because it means the pale skin carried by billions of people today is, in evolutionary terms, a very recent invention. And the reason for that invention is something you encounter every single day without thinking about it: sunlight. To understand why the sun rewrote human skin, we need to go back roughly 2 million years. Our early ancestors, the first members of the genus Homo, were losing their body hair. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, are covered in fur, and underneath that fur their skin is pale, almost pink. Scientists believe our ancestors' skin looked similar before hair loss began, but as our lineage moved on to the open savannas of East Africa, something changed. Life out in the open sun, hunting and walking long distances under equatorial rays, created a problem. Without fur to protect it, bare skin was suddenly exposed to intense ultraviolet radiation almost every day of the year. This is where the sun starts to matter biologically. Ultraviolet radiation, or UV, is not just light. It's a form of energy capable of damaging the molecules inside living cells. One of its favorite targets is DNA. UV rays can break chemical bonds in the DNA strands inside skin cells, causing mutations. Most of these mutations are harmless or get repaired, but some are not. Some lead to skin cancer, and worse for evolution's accounting, some interfere with a nutrient your body desperately needs to protect while walking around in the sun: folate. Folate, also known as vitamin B9, plays an essential role in cell division and in the formation of DNA itself. It's especially critical during pregnancy, where it's involved in the development of the neural tube, the structure that becomes the brain and spinal cord of an embryo. A deficiency in folate during early pregnancy is linked to serious birth defects. Here's the twist: UV radiation can break down folate in the bloodstream. Research on this began in the late 1970s and 1990s, when scientists discovered that intense sun exposure could lower folate levels in the body, sometimes dramatically. For early humans living under the fierce sun of tropical Africa with bare, unprotected skin, this was a real reproductive threat. Populations that couldn't protect their folate levels would have faced more failed pregnancies and birth complications over generations. This is where melanin enters the story. Melanin is the pigment responsible for skin, hair, and eye color in humans. It's produced by cells called melanocytes, and it comes in two main forms: eumelanin, which produces brown and black tones, and pheomelanin, which produces red and yellow tones. Eumelanin, crucially, is an extremely effective natural sunscreen. It absorbs UV radiation and disperses it as harmless heat before it can damage the DNA inside skin cells. Human beings with more eumelanin in their skin are, in a very literal sense, walking around with built-in sun protection. So evolution had a clear direction to push. In populations living near the equator, individuals with more melanin were less likely to suffer folate breakdown, less likely to develop skin cancers early in life, and more likely to reproduce successfully. Over dozens of generations, this selective pressure favored darker and darker skin. By roughly 1.2 million years ago, evidence suggests that early Homo populations in Africa had evolved genuinely dark, heavily pigmented skin, protecting them from the intense equatorial sun they lived under every day. For a very long stretch of human history, that was the story. Dark skin, evolved for life under strong sun, remained the standard for our species, while humanity stayed within Africa. But then, starting around 70 to 100,000 years ago, groups of modern humans began migrating out of Africa into other parts of the world. And this is where the story gets more complicated and more interesting. As humans moved north into regions like Europe, Central Asia, and parts of northern China, they encountered something radically different from the equator: weaker sunlight. Higher latitudes receive less direct UV radiation, especially during long winters when the sun sits low in the sky for months. Suddenly, the very advantage that dark skin provided near the equator became a liability. Here's why. Skin doesn't only need protection from too much of, it also needs enough of to perform another essential biological task, producing vitamin D. Vitamin D synthesis is one of the strangest and most important interactions between sunlight and the human body. When UV rays hit the skin, they trigger a chemical reaction that converts a cholesterol-related compound in skin cells into vitamin D3. This vitamin is essential for absorbing calcium from food, and calcium, in turn, is essential for strong bones. Without enough vitamin D, children can develop a condition called rickets, where bones become soft and can bow or deform. And adults can suffer bone weakening and other health problems. Now here's the catch: melanin, that excellent UV-blocking pigment, also blocks the UV rays needed to make vitamin D. In a place like equatorial Africa, sunlight is so intense and abundant that even melanin-rich skin lets through enough UVB to produce sufficient vitamin D. But in northern Europe, where sunlight is weaker and winters can go months with barely any strong UV at all, dark skin became a serious disadvantage. People with heavily pigmented skin living at high latitudes simply couldn't make enough vitamin D, putting them at higher risk of rickets and related health problems. So a new evolutionary pressure appeared, pulling in the opposite direction from before. In these northern populations, individuals with naturally lighter skin, who let more UV penetrate into their cells, had a survival and reproductive advantage because they could still generate enough vitamin D even with weak seasonal sunlight. Over thousands of years, this pressure gradually lightened the skin of populations living far from the equator. This is sometimes called the vitamin D hypothesis, and it remains the leading explanation for why light skin evolved, especially when paired with the earlier folate protection explanation for why dark skin evolved in the first place. Together, these two pressures, both centered entirely on how much ultraviolet light reaches your cells, explain much of the geographic pattern of human skin color still visible on the planet today. What makes this especially fascinating from a genetics perspective is that lighter skin didn't evolve just once. Scientists studying the genetics of pigmentation have found that Europeans and East Asians developed lighter skin through different genetic pathways. A gene called SLC24A5, for example, plays a major role in lightening skin in European populations, and researchers found that a single mutation in this gene arose and spread across Europe. It's estimated this variant became common somewhere between 19,000 and 11,000 years ago, notably more recent than you might expect, meaning some ancient Europeans from the Mesolithic period likely still had darker skin, dark hair, and strikingly blue eyes, a combination confirmed by ancient DNA studies published in the early 2010s on remains found in Spain. Meanwhile, East Asian populations evolved lighter skin largely through different genes, including one called OCA2, suggesting that light skin was, in evolutionary terms, reinvented independently in different parts of the world, rather than spreading from a single origin. This raises an obvious question. If lighter skin was such an advantage at high latitudes, why did it take so long to appear? And why wasn't it instant? The answer lies in how evolution actually works. Genetic mutations that produce a trait have to occur first, randomly, before natural selection can act on them. Then that mutation has to spread through a population over many generations, favored slightly more often because it improves survival or reproduction, but not instantly replacing older versions. Human generations are long, roughly 25 to 30 years historically, which means even a genetic change that offers a real survival advantage can take thousands of years to become common across a population. This is why some ancient populations at northern latitudes appear, from DNA evidence, to have remained relatively dark-skinned for thousands of years after first arriving there, only lightening gradually over time. You might be wondering about another obvious case, the indigenous populations of the Arctic, such as Inuit communities in Greenland and northern Canada. If light skin evolved because of weak sunlight, shouldn't Arctic peoples have the lightest skin of all humans? Interestingly, they don't. Inuit populations tend to have somewhat darker skin than many northern Europeans, despite living at extremely high latitudes. The likely explanation involves diet, not just sunlight. Traditional Arctic diets are extraordinarily rich in vitamin D, sourced from fish, seal, and whale blubber. Because their food already supplied ample vitamin D, there was less evolutionary pressure to lighten their skin purely for sunlight absorption, allowing them to retain more of protection instead. This detail actually strengthens the overall theory rather than undermining it, because it shows that skin color evolution wasn't a fixed rule, but a balance. One shaped by both sunlight and available nutrition in each specific environment. There's another common question worth answering directly. Does skin color have anything to do with intelligence, ability, or worth? Genetically and biologically, the answer is no. Skin pigmentation is controlled by a relatively small number of genes related to melanin production. And these genes are unrelated to genes influencing cognitive traits. The variation in human skin color is a textbook example of local adaptation, a trait shaped by geography and sunlight exposure, similar to how some populations evolved lactase persistence to digest milk as adults, or how people living at high altitudes in the Andes and Himalayas evolved different adaptations for low oxygen. Skin color is simply one more example of the human body adjusting, over deep time, to the specific environment its ancestors lived in. It's worth pausing on just how visible this adaptation is, compared to most other evolutionary changes in our species. Most human evolutionary adaptations are invisible to the eye, tucked away in metabolism, immune response, or how our bodies process specific proteins. Skin color, by contrast, is immediately visible, which is exactly why it became loaded with so much cultural and social meaning throughout history, despite being, biologically, nothing more than a regional adaptation to a single environmental variable, the intensity of ultraviolet light. The pigmentation of human skin says nothing about ancestry purity, nothing about capability, and nothing about the deeper genetic relationships between populations, which are, overall, remarkably similar across all humans, since we are one of the least genetically diverse species on the planet relative to our population size. So where does this leave us today? Modern humans now live in nearly every environment on Earth, from the equator to the Arctic Circle, often clustered in dense cities rather than spread out under open sky. Many of us spend most of our daylight hours indoors, in offices, schools, or homes, cutting off the very sunlight exposure that shaped our skin color over hundreds of thousands of years. This creates a strange mismatch. People with lightly pigmented skin evolved for low sunlight environments can still get sunburned quickly in strong sun, since their reduced melanin offers less protection, explaining higher skin cancer rates in fair-skinned populations exposed to intense UV, such as European-descended populations living in Australia. Meanwhile, people with darkly pigmented skin, well protected against UV damage, are statistically more prone to vitamin D deficiency when living at higher latitudes or spending most of their time indoors, a documented public health concern in several northern countries with diverse populations. In both cases, human skin is still running an ancient evolutionary program, calibrated for outdoor life near a specific latitude. Even though our actual daily environment has changed dramatically in just the last century or two, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. So, to bring it all together, the color of human skin is not an accident, and it's not arbitrary. It's a direct physical record of a two-part evolutionary negotiation with sunlight itself. Dark skin evolved first, deep